To the ordinary council meeting here today at the Lakes Entrance corporate office. On behalf of council, I'd like to acknowledge the Gunai Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Tonight is another one of our meetings where we've taken them out of the Bairnsdale Corporate Centre, and certainly the one that was held at Omura was a great success. And we've certainly learnt a lot from there. We've got the technology now where we can do that. And this here tonight at Lakes Entrance, again, about our council wanting to bring our meetings to the community. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcast to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. A warm welcome to our Special Junior Rotary Award students here tonight, Matthew McDonald from Gippsland Grammar and Brianna Thumer from St Brendan's Catholic Primary School. Welcome. Welcome to our large gallery. I see former councillor and former mayor, Michael Freshwater, in the audience. Welcome, Michael. Item 1.2, any apologies, Mr CEO?
No apologies, Mr Mayor.
Item 1.3, any declarations of conflicts of interest?
I've received no conflict of interest, Mr Mayor.
Item 1.4 is a confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday the 1st of May 2018. So it's moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Pells. Any questions on those? All those in favour?
I did have a...
Sorry, question, Councillor
Yes, there is a question. I think there is an amendment to be made. Can you bear with me for one moment,
sure,
please, Mr Mayor? I've lost the... I need to go to the... Look, I'll withdraw my request for amendment, thanks.
Okay, if there's no further questions or queries, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? You voting, Councillor White? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 1.5 is the next meetings for the Shire. Special council meeting to adopt the revised council plan 2017 to 2021 and draft council budget 2018-2019 will be held on Tuesday the 26th of June 2018 to be held at the Corporate Centre, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. Our next ordinary council meeting will be on Tuesday the 3rd of July 2018 to be held at the Orbost Service Centre, 1 Ruskin Street, Orbost, commencing at 1 p.m. Item 1.6, Mr CEO, any requests for leave of absence?
None received.
Item 1.7 is public question time, Mr CEO.
We have two public questions, Mr Mayor. The first one is Heather Terrell regarding the Oaks in Nicholson Street, Orbost. Ms Terrell, are you here? Well, we can't forward the question, Mr Mayor. No, because they're not here. They have to be present. The second...
Perhaps, Mr Mayor, could we have an explanation so the public understand why someone lodges a question with council, the question can't be read?
If a person asks a public question in public question time, they must be present. And remember, we changed the local law where they actually present their question in public time.
So it's a matter of the local laws of this council. Okay, thank you.
We have a second question from Mr Ewan Fotheringham regarding 110 Palmers Road. Mr Fotheringham.
Thank you, Mr Fotheringham. Part of the rules of this presentation or talking verbally to to your question is that, we obviously need you to stick to the topic at hand, and that there's due respect shown in both directions. Thank you.
The questions I have tonight regards the development plan application for 110 Palmers Road, which is on tonight's agenda, and I'd like 2 questions answered, please. The development plan has been created without an intersection design for the access point to Palmers Road. The application document and the Cardno report specify that an auxiliary left turning lane and a channellised right turning lane will be required. This means a major realignment of the road, with this stretch of Palmers Road becoming 4 lanes wide, a significant change from the underdimensioned 2 lanes that currently exists. The intersection design will also impact on the native vegetation precinct plan created by Council, which has identified the area of land this intersection would clear as being a habitat zone of native vegetation that needs to be protected and should not be removed. If Council were to prematurely approve this plan tonight without a proper intersection design that shows the new roadway layout and the impact to the habitat zone that intersection will have, I feel that the community will have been removed from the consultation process. Whether it's 1 tree or 100, 2 extra lanes of traffic or 20, the reports needed to explain how the community will be impacted should at the very least have been completed to allow councillors to make an informed decision. To approve the development plan as is would also remove all third-party objectors from having any future say in this intersection design, and the associated removal of habitat the council have said should not be removed. The questions I would like answered are, given that the approval of a development plan is binding and can't be challenged, and that with a little bit more effort from the developer, a completed application could have been presented for public comment, why have council officers chosen to bring this development plan before council tonight when it is not yet complete?
So those 2 questions.
There's a second question. Do council think it is in the community's best interest to approve an incomplete development plan that's missing reports, thereby removing the community's ability to voice concerns or even read those reports when they are finally completed?
Thank you. Ms Nelson, would you like to answer those questions, please?
Yes, Mr Mayor. The development plan approval process and the strategic planning work that was done in the lead up to the Lakes Northern Growth Area process provides us with significant strategic information on which to judge or not the ability to approve the development plan that's presented to you tonight. So there's a significant amount of work looking at a native vegetation precinct plan, so how we manage the loss of vegetation across the entire precinct rather than on a site-by-site basis. There's quite a lot of work done looking at traffic requirements, drainage and other details that give us the strategic context to consider the development plan. Through the process of amending the planning scheme to include the development plan requirements in the master plan for the Lakes Entrance Northern Growth Area, there was a public consultation phase. That's the phase through this process where the community are engaged formally, in a sense, and can comment on the development outcomes that we're seeking to achieve. Council does have a policy that we comply with, where we do seek feedback from affected community members through the development plan process. There isn't any statutory requirement for council to do that, but we do that, and we take into account any feedback that is received from community members through that process. The reality is that the planning scheme, which includes the requirements to be met for a development plan overlay to be approved, is set out in the scheme itself, so it's very public. And we believe that in this case there's sufficient detail for us to recommend that council approve the development plan at a strategic level, and the detail associated with the approval of a subsequent planning permit is subject to the normal planning permit processes, with the exception that there is no ability for third-party objections and appeals in this case. So the process is different here. We go through determining at a strategic level what the requirements are. We go through a process of engaging the community on the strategic level development plan overlay, and then the landowner, the developers, can proceed with some level of confidence about the planning permit requirements that they'll then encounter. Hopefully that.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Thank you, Mr Fotheringham. Is there any further public questions? Item 1.8.1 is the Assemblies of Councillors for May 2018. We have a list there and we have a recommendation, councillors.
Happy to recommend that.
So moved, Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Pels. Is there any questions? I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 1.9. Has there been any petitions, Mr. C?
No petitions received, Mr Mayor.
So item 2 is notices of motion or rescission of motion.
None received, Mr Mayor.
Mr. C, I'd like to take this opportunity now to declare a notice of condolence. Council, I wish to foreshadow moving a notice of condolence following the passing of former member of Gippsland East, David Treasure, who died on Saturday, May 19, 2018. David served 2 terms as a member for Gippsland East in the Victorian Parliament from 1992 to 1999. During his time in Parliament, he was a member of the Library and Economic Development Committees for the Shire. He was also a councillor for the Shire of Avon from 1970 to 1976. David was a long-serving member of the Mountain Cattlemen's Association, where he served as a term as president. In his early years, David attended primary school at Dargo and Lindno South and secondary school at Bairnsdale Technical School before becoming a grazier, where he also established a very successful international trading company. The Treasure family is recognised as one of the most prominent names of Victoria's high country, and David maintained a close relationship with the land. He was an honest, down-to-earth gentleman who will be remembered as a passionate defender and a true custodian of the Mountain Cattlemen's culture and heritage. On behalf of Council, we recognise David's contribution to public life and extend our sincere sympathies to his wife Jenny and the extended family. I would like to move that Council provides a letter of condolence and recognition under the Council seal outlining Mr Treasure's contribution to public life.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Seconded Councillor Ellis. All those in favour? Is there any further speakers on that? Ben, did you want to say anything?
Oh, just that I knew him well and he was a good bloke and all that sort of stuff.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Councillor
Mr
Buckley.
Mayor.
Any further speakers? Thank you. Item 3.1 is the East Gippsland Planning Scheme Amendment C126, which is a deferred business. A report is now presented for consideration as item 5.2.3 in tonight's agenda. So next item is item 4, Councillor's report. Councillor Tui.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I attended the East Gippsland Family History Group on the 8th of May, and I must say I had heard about them but never been there, and I was surprised at the sort of people that are there and what they do. It is one of the largest regional family history groups in Australia and has official status as a place of deposit for documents of national significance. And this all happens at Bairnsdale, little old Bairnsdale, and I never even realised. So another great group of volunteers. I then I attended the Lindeno Art and Craft Show, the opening night, which is quite dear to me because my kids grew up out there. We lived out there for 10 odd years. And I must say, the students at the Lindenow Primary School, there's 142 students go to that school. There was 142 different pieces of artwork on display that night, one from every child. What an astounding effort by the school. I was also very interested in, they have an artist in residence, or had an artist in residence out there, James Voller, who does photographic manipulation, can I say, and he had an installation out there in one of the local shops, and does some fantastic work. He's done work all over the world. I, along with numerous other councillors and other people, went to the opening of the new Glen Alladale Bridge, which is a great achievement out there. And then on the 17th of the 5th, went to a meeting of the local Community Road Safety Committee. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. Councillor O'Connell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. May's been a busy month, but I'd just like to highlight a couple of successful meetings attended, which was one with the Resort Management Board of Mount Hotham in regards to winter preparations, which begins this weekend. A meeting will be organised with relevant stakeholders to be held in Omura next week in developing a positive and closer working relationship between East Gippsland Shire and Mount Hotham in continuing to promote the Great Alpine Road access to Mount Hotham. Secondly, the Omura Community Centre proposal, which I've spoken about the last couple of months, has been coming along. We had a public meeting held a couple of weeks ago, and we had around 30 people come, including children, which showed great support for the project. A committee has now been formed with a range of representatives to proceed with funding opportunities, and we are also meeting with members of the CWA executive in the coming weeks to discuss the future of the CWA hall. The rest is in my report, which will be submitted to the officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see a full gallery. It's been a busy month, but I want to raise in particular and take note of the Rural Council Summit that was here in Lakes Entrance this month. And in particular, not just the fact that there were 38 Rural Shire representatives here, over 80 or 90 councillors, but of most rural shires, 79, is it? Okay, so I'd stand corrected. Was the fact that we as a council invited our local community representatives to attend that summit. And I think that was a real highlight for me. So as an example, we had Rhonda Manhigh from Omeo, Joan Moore from Newlands Arm, Lisa Camp from Mountain Rivers District, Tubbut Bonang, Jeannie Holker from Mountain Rivers, Goongerah Community, Deb Foskey, Mountain Rivers District, Tubbut, James Anthony, Mountain Rivers District, Goongerah, Gary Brownlee from Can River, Greg Cameron from Can River, Aileen Blackburn from Can River, Marion Dawson, Twin Rivers District, Sonia West from Twin Rivers, Velmai West, Twin Rivers, and Michael Oxer from Twin Rivers. Now, that's really important. It's really important to get our local community members involved in local government and to provide an opportunity for them to be involved in current place and community plans, which is what we're working on as a community, and access quality input by speakers around economic ideas currently impacting on our community, among other things. Ladies and gentlemen, the rest of my report is there, but I really wanted to highlight that those community members and those some far-flung communities were represented at the Rural Summit here in Lakes Entrance this month.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it brief. I just would like to touch on something I didn't get a chance to touch on last month as I wasn't here, but I attended the Youth Colour Fest and I spoke on behalf of the Mayor at the Victorian Youth Week event. The core organisational group behind the event consists of Freezer and our very own youth ambassadors. They displayed fantastic management skills and provided a very fun and engaging event. They showcased great talent with local live music, with Escape, BMX and Scooter Comp. The crowd were extremely well behaved, and the hard work that the youth that were putting on that event showed was just outstanding. So I would like to give congratulations to those and all the best. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Pells.
Mr. Mayor. Yes, it has been a busy month. I'm feeling for the farmers with the lack of rain that we've had, but with the rain we have had, it's good to see that the weather's still warm enough to push up the grass, but yeah, the farmers are doing it hard at the moment. But anyway, the month I have been busy with the road commitments to the Shire, with our seats meeting being held in Shoalhaven. It's a 7-hour drive, and I took the liberty of driving all the way up the Princes Highway, and I got over the border, and I was quite envious of their road and how much it's developed, and the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been put into road upgrades up there. So SEATS has a commitment to our region for the 17 councils that reside between Dandenong and Wollongong, and we are taking the petition to the federal member, to the upper and lower house, for them to consider it in regards to putting it on the road of significance, and therefore aiming for additional funding for our region. And we are pushing to have dual lanes all the way through. Vic Roads, the project at Can River at the roundabout is well underway, and also their commitment to our rest areas that they actually had funded. That's all happening to the east of us. When I was at the SEATS meeting, Harvey Donnelly reported from Transport Victoria, and he mentioned that they're finalising the Stratford Rail Bridge duplication, the plans at the moment, and yes, it will be going ahead, and that Vic Road still has an additional $250,000 to spend on the Bairnsdale area, which was on the Bairnsdale Main Street safety upgrades. It was to address the West End store section, the alternative transport route, which included an alternative access over the Mitchell River, which I think the whole of the east of Victoria will adore when it comes into play, because it will be a big figure item, and it will be something that we definitely need for the future of our region to safeguard it against flood and issues that we have inundation. One of the interesting things that I attended was MOB Transport and Infrastructure last week, and we had an addressing from Transport Victoria on autonomous vehicles and how they might work in our communities. The interesting thing that stood out about this was the fact in years to come, if we all become reliant on like Uber vehicles, basically there'll be huge areas of car parking that will become available for community offset areas. And so car parking won't be an issue in the future. There'll be open land developments or perhaps housing. So it was a curious conversation that we had around the table about urbanisation and open space coming through. One of the other things they also spoke about was congestion compliant, and they're actually trialling a project with Inner Melbourne, and they're saying that the road development occupation charges are being put up between $1,200 and $1,800 per lane per week, and mainly based on congestion impact. And the bottom line is it'll be something that council will have to play a game in, because they don't actually have any kind of local laws, and the permits will come through council, and we will be receiving charges as far as they can work out. So that's sort of an interesting throwback from that meeting that we went to last week. That's all I have, Mr Mayor. My report's gone through to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Pels. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Due to the fact that I had 1 month's leave of absence, I actually have nothing to report. So that may be a relief to many around the table. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor Ellis.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr Mayor. That's a bit hard to beat. Look, as an opening comment, I think I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. Though I'm not sure when Council last conducted an ordinary meeting here in Lakes, which I think was probably in the late 90s, early 2000 perhaps. It's great to see an ordinary meeting of Council back here at Lakes Entrance. Council must remember, of course, this was our original headquarters, and parochially I'm sad that we shifted to Bairnsdale. Hopefully this will be the first of many ordinary meetings and other meetings coming down here to Lakes and to the other regions throughout our wonderful Shire. I'll keep my report very brief this evening. and just mention a couple of more parochial matters. I attended as president of the Surf Club, the annual paddle challenge this year. It's one of the Surf Club's major fundraising events. I also attended the Bullock Island Community Information and Consultation Days conducted by DELP and the Shire. The sessions included noting and acknowledging the distress some members of our community experienced by the seemingly random and perhaps ill-thought placement of numerous bollards placed on the island to manage vehicle parking. I visited the Bensine District Family History Group, referred to by Councillor Toohey, and they are an inspirational group, and I'm pleased to say so is our family history group here and history groups here in Lakes Entrance. Right, continuing on a parochial manner, I further attended the Victorian Coastal Council's final awards tonight, back in the end of May, and I'm pleased to advise that the Biodiversity and Conservation Award was won by Gippsland Ports, and that a special certificate of recommendation was awarded to the Tambo Bluff Coast Care Group. I further attended in company with the Mayor and the CEO the Regional Shared Services Forum briefing at Traralgon, where the outline of regionalised services and the local government will continue into the future. I also attended the Future of Local Government Forum in Melbourne and will be circulating the presentations by many challenging futurists and other speakers in the coming weeks as they become available. I finally attended the MAV State Conference in Melbourne a week ago, where many issues impacting upon our communities were hotly debated and in preparation for further advocacy to government as the election cycle comes even closer. And I conclude by referring to the launch of the tender for the old slipway site at Lakes Entrance, and I look forward to a briefing from Council on the process and understanding Council's important lead role in that matter and how we came to hold that position. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On the evening of Wednesday the 30th last month, I attended a play at the Forge, mostly on how to die happily. Listen to this, I even got a small part in the play, and it didn't even require me to die. Enclosed, the presenters have asked me to pass on the people that were sponsoring this, and there's a couple of notable ones, of course, including us, and Dementia Australia and Palliative Care and so forth. And it was a very interesting and play and to put the lighter side of going to the promised land, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And anyway, then on the filling in for the Mayor, who's a very busy man, I went on a reconciliation cruise on the 31st and found it most interesting in spite of the weather. 10 out of the 40 of the guests did not turn up, and that was quite understandable under the circumstances. On the next day, I attended the reconciliation function at the West Bairnsdale Primary. It was well attended and very well presented. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. I'd just like to mention a couple of items. I've provided my report, but the first one I'd like to talk about is the good work that's going on with our eastern neighbours, the cross-border collaboration that we've started off really strongly with in relation to the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, which is a series of councils that border our state border, and it was pleasing to see that the Victorian State Government in its recent budget has also now have a line item in its budget for a cross-border commissioner in Victoria, and I think there's some significant opportunity for us to work closer with our neighbours, and one of the early identified opportunities is around the Country University Centre and potentially being able to establish something similar in East Gippsland to the Cooma model, which is a really good model which has helped keep their young people in their region educating themselves, but also, more importantly, people that want to have a change in career, the opportunity to study locally at any university and any degree through this fantastic facility. My colleagues and I launched our East Gippsland Shire Cultural Awareness video, and I'm pleased to say that we were nominated for a state award, which we received a highly commended award. HEART stands for helping, or acronym for Helping Achieve Reconciliation Together. It was the 5th awards, and it's an initiative by Reconciliation Victoria in partnership with Victoria Local Governance Association, or VLGA, and supported by the Bank of Australia and Local Government Victoria. The awards were handed out by our Minister, and these awards recognise Victorian initiatives that contribute to local reconciliation outcomes. In the local government category, we were up against some pretty hard hitters, and our video, our commitment to reconciliation, saw us shortlisted to the last 3. But we were up against Darebin, Glen Ira, Greater Shepparton, Moonee Valley and Mount Alexander. I'd like to thank all the people involved in producing our prize-winning cultural awareness video. The people like Auntie Doris Patton, Grattan Mullet, Rob Hudson, organisations like GJAC and their staff, GLOWAC and their staff, our council staff, particularly the Human Resources team, and the 2 people that accompanied me to Melbourne to receive our award, Jamie Lynch and Rebecca Ashton. And of course, special thanks to videographer Julian Stannis, who's done an amazing job, and I encourage anybody that hasn't seen the full video to have a look at it. His skills in this area have heightened the experience of viewing this exceptional video. Thank you. There is a link, yes. So that brings us to item 5.1 and 5.1.1, Disability Advisory Committee appointment.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This item is presented tonight for council consideration, and specifically to seek your appointment of Chair and Deputy Chair for the Council's Disability Advisory Committee. The Disability Advisory Committee is a committee that Council is required to have. The members of it are volunteers and supported by staff and a councillor representative, Councillor Ellis. The terms of reference that were adopted by Council only relatively recently require that Council will formally appoint both of these positions from the membership of the committee, and that they'll serve for a 2-year period. And we're at the point now where nominations from the committee have been sought and presented to Council, and tonight we are seeking your endorsement of both a position of Chair and Deputy Chair for a 2-year period. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Any questions? Councillor Pels.
Can you just clarify, we did have someone present an application and they withdrew it at one stage, so we had 3 people apply and...
The process was that there were 2 people who nominated, and one of those members has decided to withdraw their nomination and has taken leave from the committee at this time. So further expression of interest was carried out with the committee, and so there are 2 people to appoint to 2 positions.
So any further questions from councillors? Councillor Pels, you'd like to nominate the
I'd like
position of Chair?
Recommend that the Council formally adopt ex-councillor Jeff McNeil to the position of Chair for East Gippsland Shire Council Disability Advisory Committee, commencing from Wednesday the 6th of May 2018 for a 2-year period, and that Council formally appoint Brenton Dinsdale to the position of Deputy Chair for the supporting role for the Disability Shire Council Disability Advisory Committee, commencing from Wednesday the 6th of May 2018 for a 2-year period.
Thank you, Councillor Pels. Do we have a seconder? Sure. Councillor Reeves. Speakers for?
I'd like to state the work that the Disability Advisory Committee does plays a big role in voicing difficulties of access and inclusion within our communities. Their work aids in areas of planning, strategy and investment improvements, and in whole they help make life easier for not only people with disabilities but also our ageing communities, which is all of us basically. It draws on the expertise and experiences of these people with disabilities, their carers, employers and businesses and community groups, and basically they address all aspects and helps council to support inclusion and accessibility into our strategies, planning and policies.
Any further speakers? Councillor Ellis?
I just want to bring to council's attention the importance of this advisory committee. It crosses across our full policy in relation to inclusion and diversity, and of course represents the group, the various groups of persons with a disability in our community. It helps us to consider policy, and it helps us to have empathy with others perhaps less fortunate to us, and helps us in looking around our streets and the difficulties faced by those who are not full able-bodied. As such, I consider this to be a particularly important position and appointment, and as a committee, one of the most important of the advisory committees that council possesses, and as such I encourage councillors to consider deeply the recommendations before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Is 8 for, 1 against? Yes. So item 5.2.1 is development plan at 110 to 138 Palmers Road, Lakes Entrance.
Mr Mayor, Mr Ewan Fotheringham wants to make a verbal submission on this on this matter. Thank you.
Would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Council, for allowing me the opportunity to speak again about this. I don't really know where to start. I feel that council officers have got this one wrong. Kate and Nicole and the team do a fantastic job, and what I say now is no disrespect to them. I think the crux of this subdivision is, and the bulk of my issue, there's a single house block that's getting subdivided as stage one, that the people who own the land obviously own. That's stage one. Because no work is needed to be done to the roads, the power, anything, there's no work needs to be done, it's an existing house. Crowther and Sadler have asked for all of the technical reports to be deferred until stage 2 is completed. If you guys approve the development plan tonight, all of those technical reports which detail the intersection here at Palmers Road, the native vegetation precinct plan and the vegetation removal, all of that technical stuff that I think's in the community's interest and needs to have a say on, we lose our voice. We lose our opportunity to have a say on that information, regardless of the outcome, regardless of whether, you know, we're for it or against it. We should have the right to say, yes, we like this, or no, we don't. And at this point in time, if you guys approve this development plan, I believe that we lose that right. There's a few things that make me concerned even more. Like when I read through the reports, the way that the planning department has dismissed some of the objections, and there's been quite a few, I think. Most of them have been dismissed by saying this will be covered in the planning permit down the track, this will be covered in the planning permit over there. Like, It's like the whole thing has been pushed out of our control. In any other circumstance, if there wasn't that initial block that they could subdivide off first without having to do any work, if they had to do work from stage 2, all of these documents would have had to have been provided up front. I and the rest of the community would have had an opportunity to speak to them. As it is, the plan that was provided, and as Kate said, it's been out to community consultation, things like that, because it lacked the intersection design, it lacks how much bush is going to be removed, it lacks the traffic impact assessment. I mean, there are 3 main things that affect our day-to-day lives. We drive up and down the road 8, 10 times a day. We see this every day. That information was missing when it got put out to public consultation. So I don't think the public consultation process has actually been as successful as it should have been, because people didn't have the information to make an informed decision. And Kate will hop up in a moment. She'll have all the technical jargon as to why they can do this and why they can justify that. But I just feel as a citizen that I've lost my right to have a say in something that I use every day, and I think that sucks. Some of the other things that stick out in the report, I mean, obviously this gets put out to the DELP and East Gippsland Water, all those sorts of people. In regards to the vegetation that does need to be removed, DELP's response to council on the matter is the department is concerned that native vegetation is proposed to be removed that is contrary to the Lakes Entrance Northern Growth Adoption Area Native Vegetation Precinct Plan dated October 2013. Even DELP is saying, hang on a minute, this isn't right. East Gippsland Water supports the development, however notes that the master planning for this area for the development occurring between 2039 and 2060. Therefore, the developer will need to work closely with East Gippsland Water in relation to the provision of water and sewer. Might be able to press the button and might not get to go anywhere. Like, to take that time for the developer and to say, hang on a minute, you haven't quite got all the information here. Like, I understand there's a cost to do some of the expensive reports, hydrology, geology, all that sort of nonsense. To design the intersection though, and say how much bush is going to get taken out, I thought that was a fairly easy thing for them to do. And I suppose I'm a little bit disappointed that it has come this far without that having been done. So I suppose, I mean, once it's approved, the community loses its voice. In any other application, all of that supporting documents would have had to be provided at the start of the approval process. All I ask is that my opportunity to read and respond to these documents, regardless of their findings, is not taken away from me or the rest of the community. I think that's in the community's best interest, and I think by approving this tonight, you're going against that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Ms. Nelson.
Mr. Mayor, if I know this, it's not it's an oral submission and not intended to be debated, but it perhaps would, before Mr. Richards introduces the item, perhaps just provide some context for the process.
Yes.
The approval of subdivision using development plans is something that is still reasonably new in East Gippsland. It's a new way of dealing with and providing developers and the community with some certainty at a very early part of the process. So, as I said earlier, the overall plan for how the Northern Growth Area in Lakes Entrance will develop was dealt with through the master planning work that we've done for Lakes Northern Growth Area, and that's contained in the scheme. The scheme has been amended to require that developers provide detail to meet the development plan overlay, and that's what you're seeing today. So we're approving an overall development plan for this property. it's not a planning permit. There's a planning permit that is subsequently required, but this process shifts the opportunity for community members to be involved at that higher level strategic part of the process so that people can understand what the overall scheme of development will be and in general terms what the strategy is in terms of the rollout of infrastructure, the way that we deal with the environmental impact and other matters. As you can see from the plan, there's quite a number of things that we do assess, including access to services and those sorts of things. So the complaint here is that there is no longer a right to be involved or ability to be involved in the detail, and that's absolutely what the case is here, because the detail is really much of the technical information in terms of standards that need to be met for intersection roadworks, connection to sewer. It's the technical servicing of the subdivision. The objections were, I guess, assessed, or the comments made by community members were assessed in respect to whether they were whether those things were able to be addressed or should be addressed at the strategic level, so the development plan level, or whether they are matters of detail that need to be considered as part of the planning permit application. And the reality is that we don't expect everybody to provide us with the level of detail that would be required for a planning permit at this strategic stage. It's just not reasonable to expect before people know that they have approval to have done the detailed design of that intersection. But I can assure you that the detailed design and the other matters that are of concern are picked up through the planning permit process, and they're a technical, they're more of a technical requirement in respect to the detail of how the subdivision is developed. And in this case, we're talking about, in the first stage, just the excise of a dwelling, and the later details will be provided as part of a future approval process. So I hope that just provides a little bit of context for people. It's intended to give people certainty, both the community and the developer up front, what the scope of the development will be, but it doesn't, it does purposefully eliminate involvement in the planning permit because it's about the detail rather than the strategy of how the development will happen.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Councillor Roberts, you had a question?
Thank you. Ms Nelson, is there going to be any, going forward in the planning process, is there going to be any other opportunities for members of the public to make submissions on this?
Not once this development plan is approved, no. It's basically saying on the basis of this process, we're happy to say to council you should endorse the development plan because it meets the requirements of the East Gippsland planning scheme, the development plan overlay. While there is a secondary approval process through a planning permit application, the development plan overlay and the planning scheme specifically exempts the application from third-party objection and appeals.
Mr Richards, did you want to introduce? Oh, sorry, Councillor Ellis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm just concerned so that the community clearly understands the situation. What if it becomes apparent, and Mr Frotherton referred to this, that is traffic issues that arise from Palmers Road, which is not a high quality road. What if they're identified and brought to the attention of council? What actions can a member of the community expect in these circumstances if we, in adopting a development plan this evening, negate the right of a member of the community to bring to attention what might be seen or termed as a planning flaw?
Well, there's nothing preventing people highlighting traffic issues if they subsequently result from the future development of this land. I suspect that there won't be any visible traffic issues in Palmers Road as a result of this development anytime soon. Council has, through the Lakes Northern Growth Area process, some obligations to collect funds from developers and also upgrade roads in the precinct. And my understanding, I do understand that the residents are, one of their primary focus points is the status of Palmer's Road. And my understanding is the draft budget actually includes some funds to undertake some design work in future years. So it's something that is on council's radar. It's not an obligation, sole obligation of the developers to look at upgrading Palmer's Road, because that would be unreasonable.
Look, I do appreciate this, but the concept of seeing the Northern Growth Strategy seen through requires council to consider the adoption of development plans. Can I ask Mr. Waits, just if he is able to, that is, if able, to give council some indication of when the Palmer's Road or the Northern Growth area covered by the strategy of Lakes Entrance would be covered by any capital works outward programs?
Councillor Ellis, it's very much a question of how long's a piece of string. It will depend very much on the rate of development and the number of allotments that are developed. At this point in time, I wouldn't say that Palmer's Road required any urgent upgrading at all. It's holding up quite well. The traffic's not any ridiculous volume on it, but there will be a tipping point where the amount of development will require an upgrade. But that will be conditioned as the stages of the development progress.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Pels.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kate, with regards to the proposal at hand there, I noticed that they were proposing for stage one to be the undeveloped land, which was considered to be parklands, and I felt it was a bit unreasonable to be having the stage one being the open space as stage one, whereas they haven't sold any blocks yet to be able to make any profit to be passing that on, is my concern for the applicant.
Well, the applicant has proposed that as stage one, not us, but it does recognise that there is a parcel of open space to be provided as part of the subdivision. The first stage is, at this point in time, simply excising an existing dwelling. So we're not creating anything more than that. The stage one has been laid out in a way that it could be appropriately subdivided further into the future. So the developer's intent, so the purpose of the development plan overlay is to say this is how this land will be developed over time, so that we can see how the land will be laid out, how open space will be provided, how we'll protect the waterway that flows there through there. Did I say how the road network connects up already? So it gives everyone a clear understanding of how this land will be developed, how it will connect with adjoining land, where the access point will be onto Palmer's Road, and what that intersection looks like. Not at this stage, no. So the details.
Sorry, you can't interject. Thank you.
The information contained in the planning scheme provides details of the intersection treatment that will be required at the time that happens. And councillors might recall when we adopted the development plan overlay and approvals for the land immediately to the east, the Marringbower estate, we required that developer to also contribute to that intersection and roadway connection. So there's an overall plan here. The higher level detail is provided here in conjunction with the requirements of the planning scheme, and the technical details are addressed through the planning permit application.
Councillor Tui, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kate, the benefit or otherwise of the change in the system to go through a development plan first. What is the major difference between that and what we had, and why has that change occurred?
Well, I guess the change has occurred because in this particular part of Lakes Entrance, we're dealing with multiple landowners, all with land zoned residential, and which has to comply with an overall scheme for how this area will develop. So whenever any of the landowners approaches us in respect to subdivision, there are requirements that they need to demonstrate how they meet the overall plan for the Lakes Northern Growth Area. So we're asking them all up front to demonstrate how their land will be developed at this kind of level of detail. And that gives them certainty that they understand what they're approved to have to be developing, so what the high level conditions are. And we approved the overall structure plan for this part of Lakes Entrance through the planning scheme process. So this is embedded in the planning scheme, and we also provide people with an opportunity to comment on this level of detail. The benefit to the developer is that they don't have to come back for every single stage and seek a planning permit for every single stage and go through a public process. The benefit for the surrounding landowners is that they can see the overall end development that will be achieved here, and if it changes, then it has to go through a process. So it is different because not every single stage will be put out there, but we're saying upfront to people, both the developer, this is what you can do, and the landowners, this is what you can expect to see happen, rather than seeing it in dribs and drabs.
Sure, Joe, yeah. The reason I ask that question, Kate, is that it appears that people have less of an opportunity to have input in regards to what's happening within their community and how things are being done within their community. Is that actually the case?
Look, it may depend how you view it, but what we're saying is that we're telling people up front, right from the beginning, what they can expect to see in terms of development of the northern growth area in Lakes Entrance. If they really want to comment on the detail around vegetation removal, intersection treatments, where driveways are, what kind of fences, that's a different proposition. But really what we're saying is those things are captured by the process. It's not, it's basically saying to the community, you really need to look at this at a higher level. The technical details, which are set by standards, are dealt with through the planning permit process. There's not a lot that would change in terms of that detail.
Councillor Reeves, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And Kate, I think that your last comment has just emphasised again to assuage and reassure the community members about these matters. And I think I heard you say the technical details are addressed in the planning permit process, and that's where further input is possible. For example, treatments, if there is potential for treatments of intersections, even though they are guided by standards and VicRoads processes, for example. But just to reassure people that this is a high-level view, this is where things are going to lie. When we get down to the detail, there is another opportunity in the planning process.
No, sorry if I haven't been clear. No, there is not another opportunity. Yeah, there is a planning permit, but it's exempt from a notice and objection. So this process, which is common throughout Victoria, it's about giving people certainty about the overall outcome without people having to get involved in the nitty-gritty detail of subdivisions and seeing the bigger picture, understanding the overall outcome rather than seeing it happen in dribs and drabs. So it's a more strategic approach to the way that towns will expand and develop. And in a circumstance like this, it's really important because with the Marringbower Heights, there had always been this intent to connect the road network through to Palmer's Road, but there was no way to actually make it happen. The development plan overlay and the overall outline development plan for here is the mechanism for making that happen. If it happens on a stage-by-stage, property-by-property basis, then you don't get to understand how you create accessible, well-developed, well-serviced, efficiently serviced residential areas with the facilities that need to support that growing population. That's what the purpose of this is, not to engage the community in the nitty-gritty details of servicing a subdivision.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's just to assist Councillor, the direction of Councillor Reeves' question, and that returned, and I returned back to my opening question, and that was simply is that if a member of the public identifies an issue in relation to the roadways and works being done that don't seem to match with the strategic direction of the development plan, that member of the committee does have the right to bring that to the attention of council and anticipate council reacting in an appropriate manner to that observation.
All I can say is we won't be approving anything that's not in accordance with the development plan requirements. That's the reality. If there are other off-site impacts that aren't anticipated or emerge over time, then people can raise traffic hazards or safety concerns with us at any time that they like. Yeah.
This is right. If I'm saying this is an action outside of the planning permit process, which we can no longer approve, I think you've made that clear. It's just the issue of the issues of concern being brought to council's attention, and that they will be paid the courtesy of that being considered.
Yes. Yep.
Are there any further questions on that point? Mr Richards, you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think most of it's been covered, but I suppose I will just summarise the process that we went through for this particular development application. So it was lodged in 2017. Excuse me. Modified plan set was received in 2018. The plans were modified to facilitate early release of road connection from Palmer's Road to Merringbower Heights and to enable early creation of reserve for open space purposes. To get that done early in the project or early in the piece. The land will be subject to future payment of development contributions comprising community infrastructure levy, drainage levy and residential levy. A detailed assessment was undertaken by council officers, and this is provided as an attachment. Community engagement took place and 8 submissions were received. We did also receive a request to view the amended documents last night. The engagement report, officer response and actions regarding the submission are also attached to the report. So the report's now, the recommendations now presented for endorsement with the intent of the outcome to facilitate residential growth for Lakes Entrance in the identified growth area.
Thank you, Mr Richards. Any further questions, councillors? Do you have a recommendation before us? We have a mover for the recommendation. Moved, Councillor Ellis.
Happy to move so.
Seconded, Councillor Pearls. Speakers?
Very briefly for it, I encourage councillors to support this next stage of the Northern Growth Strategy for Lakes Entrance. Considered planning is an appropriate thing for our town well into the future and for all towns throughout the East Gippsland Shire. It has been a fairly good process, and that process will continue with the other further stages of this project. As such, councillors, I recommend the motion before you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Seconded. Would you like to speak?
Yes, I'd like to just say this development is probably the first of a few that we'll have in our region, I anticipate, but we need to sort of embrace and go with the process. I feel that this is consistent with our Northern Growth Strategy for Lakes Entrance, and some of the, it will take a bit of pressure off some of the lower lying areas. It's a natural development from what we already have in this region. It's progressive development up the hill, and we've got some exciting things coming up for Lakes Entrance, so I look forward to this process developing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearls. Any further speakers? There's no further speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's 8 for, 1 against. Yeah. Councillor Tui. Item 5.2.2 is East Gippsland Planning Scheme Amendment C143, rezone and subdivide 28 Main Street, Lindenow, and I believe we have a couple of...
Mr Mayor, we have two speakers. The first speaker is Mr Chris Curnow, who's the Principal Planner at Beveridge Williams.
Welcome, Chris. Yep.
I'm coming through loud and clear? Okay, great. I'd like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak in relation to Planning Scheme Amendment C143. My name is Chris Curnow. I'm a Principal Town Planner with Victoria's largest land survey firm, Beveridge Williams & Co. I work in our Bairnsdale and Sale offices. The submissions that I will provide this evening are made on behalf of Michael Freshwater, who's the proponent for Planning Scheme Amendment C143. The aim of these submissions is to demonstrate to Council the wisdom in supporting the amendment. First, I'll list the aspects of the officer's report that we accept and agree with. Second, I'll list the pertinent matters that we believe were omitted from the report. Finally, I'll discuss the points upon which we disagree with the officer's report and why they justify proceeding with Amendment C143 without delay. So, the aspects we agree with. 1, we accept and agree with the description of the characteristics of the subject site and the manner in which Michael uses the escarpment portion, the upper terrace, for residential purposes at the moment. 2, we accept and agree with the description of what Amendment C143 seeks to achieve, i.e. the rezoning of the escarpment land from farming zone to township zone. The following matters are ones we believe were omitted from the officer report. 1, we don't believe that it was made adequately clear to the councillors that Michael's escarpment land is directly abutted on its east, west and south sides by blocks that are already both in the township zone and used for residential purposes. 2, there was no mention of the fact that when we approached council about this rezoning a year ago, it was given the green light. Then, through the following 10 months of collaborative cooperation with council officers, referral authorities and the state government, it was all green lights. Let's get on with it. Great idea. This lasted until 6 weeks ago, at which point we were patiently waiting for the matter to be reported to council for approval to go on exhibition to the general public. When we were called into a meeting with council officers. At this meeting, or different council officers from the ones we've been dealing with. At this meeting, we were advised that while there wasn't anything particularly wrong with what we wanted to do, they wanted us to wait until a structure plan was prepared for Lindenow. In other words, the light that had been green all the way changed to orange, and we're told to wait. We asked when the Lindenow structure plan would be ready. We were told there was no money in the budget for it, and no idea when it would be done. As you can understand, this was all perplexing to learn after 10 months, or nearly a year of mutual collaboration. That period of positive collaboration in which no concerns about appropriateness of site-specific amendments or the need for a structure plan were raised. Until 6 weeks ago when we were sprung with a surprise. Now, I don't know how much everyone else likes stopping or being confronted with orange traffic lights when you didn't see them coming out of nowhere, but we didn't. So Michael decided to press ahead and get a resolution from council on whether it was agreed that there was a need to wait for the preparation of a structure plan before his land could be rezoned or not, which is why we're here tonight. This leads me to the matters in the officer's report that we disagree with. The first is that officers are suggesting to council that site-specific planning scheme amendments that don't directly relate to a structure plan are normally discouraged. I've been a town planner for 18 years and I've just completed the biggest privately run rezoning in the history of the Wellington Shire Council. But I don't think that you need anything like that kind of background in town planning to know that if your property directly abuts properties in a different zone on 3 sides and over the road, and yet you all use your land for the same purpose, i.e. residential purposes, then your zoning is an anomaly. And that is the case with Michael's escarpment land. Council carry out rezonings to routinely correct anomalies in the planning scheme before they prepare structure plans a few times a year. So for officers to suggest to council that a site-specific rezoning is inappropriate without a structure plan is misleading. After all, if it was true, then there is no way that the rezoning of Councillor Tui's land from farming zone to township zone a few doors up would ever have received support from Planning Panels Victoria or from the state government. Yet it did, and was rezoned on the 10th of April 2014, without there being a structure plan for Lindenow in place, even though the town had a much bigger land supply than it does today. I'm afraid, councillors, that the reason why the light that had been green for 10 months inexplicably turned orange 6 weeks ago is clearly revealed in the officer's report, where a request is made for a budget allocation of $65,000 to fund the preparation of a structure plan for Lindenow. Now, I never knew a successful bureaucrat who passed up an opportunity to ask for money, so fair play. But I guess we shouldn't have been surprised that when they saw the evidence in Michael's submission that Lindenow was growing, they would try to use it as leverage to improve their budget. So, to recap, we want council to understand that the officer's suggestion that Amendment C143 is premature until a structure plan is prepared for Lindenow is both unsupported by tangible evidence and completely contrary to the advice that was given by officers throughout the collaborative preparation of the amendment material that is before council tonight. So, before making a decision on whether Amendment C143 should remain parked at the traffic lights until a structure plan is prepared, we would first ask council to consider the following benefits of allowing it to proceed. First, supporting Amendment C143 will cost council very little, as it is being carried out as a privately run planning scheme amendment. This means the proponent bears practically all of the costs. Secondly, supporting Amendment C143 will quickly provide a much-needed 3.1-year boost to Lindenow's shrinking supply of viable residential land. Michael's escarpment land is already connected to all service utilities, and with its views over the Mitchell River Valley, represents an immediately developable, viable residential site. Third, the additional rates revenue that will flow from the rezoning of Michael's land and its eventual development with around 10 residential blocks will fund the preparation of a structure plan for Lindenow within the space of 4 to 5 years. So, when viewed rationally, Amendment C143 represents a win-win for council. Whereas adopting the officer's recommendation will cost the Shire's ratepayers a lot of money up front, only to delay the same inevitable outcome for Michael's escarpment land by many years. In summing up, Amendment C143 was given a green light by everyone involved for 10 months, as it was deemed appropriate from both a regulatory and a town planning perspective. The last-minute suggestion from different council officers that it should be delayed until a structure plan is prepared will both place an immediate cost burden on ratepayers and, given its zoning has effectively become an anomaly, will not change the eventual outcome for this land in any way. Whereas allowing Amendment C143 to proceed will allow Lindenow to grow for an additional 3.1 years in a sustainable, logical and orderly fashion with negligible cost to ratepayers. On that note, I'd like to thank council for hearing these submissions and invite questions through the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Curnow. Question, Councillor Roberts.
Kate, is it true that the abutting land around the proponents' land is zoned township?
There are pockets of township land zoned there, yes, and some farming zone land, yep.
One more, Councillor.
Was the speaker's comment correct in what he said? In regards to the bordering properties, I mean, I understand that the land immediately behind it on the flats is farming, but are the other bordering properties, are they township?
There are some pockets of township land in sort of jutting into the property, and adjacent to the property, but there's also farming zone land abutting it. I think, well, at the back and the side, I don't have a full zoning plan in front of me, but I can certainly find it. But my understanding is that the only township zoned land is along Main Road and not further back than about the depth of a house site. Yeah. And some of that land, from my inspection on the day I went out there, is actually being used for growing vegetables.
Yeah. Councillor Ellis, you have a question?
Just a clarification. Can you remind me again how long ago you made your first application and to whom you made that application to, please?
Thank you, councillor. We approached council in May last year. We were assigned the author of the council report, Elaine Wood, the senior strategic planner, as our contact, and we worked with Elaine on it up until we were approached by the council officers.
Any other questions, councillors? Yeah. Councillor Tui, you have a question?
Yeah, Chris, in regards to the surrounding land, and Kate, I do know this area, as you pointed out, Chris. It does have, I'm not sure the zone, but Kate, the farming that is happening down the left-hand side of this property is only on a very small property. And those people are related to the people that own the flats. So that's only a very, very small paddock there. So essentially on three sides, this property is surrounded by, if not township zone, very, very small properties. There is a tiny little bit on the north-western boundary that is farm zone. But the rest I would suggest is either township or very small properties.
I'm happy to be corrected. I'll get the map up, but my understanding is that there's no township zone beyond the back of the smaller lots at front Main Road, and there are some smaller lots there that are in the farming zone. That's my recollection.
Further question? Councillor Buckley.
Yeah. A simple one here, it says that the council does not support the request to rezone. Okay, if we refuse this, what's the next move? Does the applicant have to reapply again, and how does it all work?
Well, currently there's no motion. Did you have a question for Mr. Curnow or Kate?
Well, whoever wants to answer it.
But currently there's no motion.
Well, what's this recommendation then? We've got to vote on the recommendation. That is a motion in itself.
Councillor Ellis, did you want to add something?
Mr. Mayor, if we're getting to that stage in the meeting, I'm happy to move a particular motion at this time, which may assist Councillor Buckley in his understanding of the motion.
First, Councillor Ellis.
Sorry?
We have another speaker.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
I forewarn of my intention to move a motion, Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I'll speak to Councillor Buckley.
Councillor Pels, did you have a further question?
Yes, I just wanted to understand the risk of what it would be to the applicant if you had to wait 12 months or 2 years for the structure plan to be completed.
Thank you through the chair. I'm glad I was asked that question, actually, because it's going to take a little bit longer than I had in 5 minutes to go through this. So thank you. So, for example, we take the optimistic representations in the council report set. Council spends $65,000, and in a year's time, we're back here and there's a Lindeno structure plan in front of us for council to consider. And it's been exhibited to the people of Lindeno. Now, given that someone's going to come down from Melbourne and write this report up, it'll cost a fair bit of money, and they're going to say, look at the main street of this town. Look at the north side of that main street. That should be residential or commercial or what have you. So this structure plan is going to say, rezone the north side of Main Street, Lindenow, and that'll go out to the public. Someone from Bulmer Farms will be on the phone to council the next day and say, what's that going to do to my rates? The answer's going to be put a 0 on the end of it. So anyway, we roll up, council says, yep, but that's a good idea nonetheless. We roll up back here, we're back here in a year's time, we've got the same application ahead. The structure plan says that land should go into the general residential zone. The township zone, that's old, general residential zone. So we roll up and say, we want to rezone this land general residential. And someone's going to say, but all the land around it's still in the township zone. You can't just have one general residential zone blocking the whole of Lindenow. So we're going to get knocked back. Now, we're going to get knocked back until someone's willing to take on that task of rezoning the entire north side of Main Road. There'll be someone at this council with the letters QC after their name, saying our dead body, we've just put all this money into this farm. You're not putting a 0 on the end of our rates in a
Chris,
hurry.
can you just stick to the...
Sorry, okay.
Elaborating a bit.
Okay, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a big, expensive fight for council to rezone Lindenow, even with a structure plan. This amendment to the township zone works now as a site-specific rezoning because it's effectively an anomaly. It doesn't become an anomaly if we try to rezone under a structure plan to the general residential zone. If we're putting it in the same zone as everything else in Lindenow, it's an anomaly. So therefore, it's a lot easier to do it now. We'll be waiting 6 years at least before council could get something like that through. Rezoning a whole town is hard. In the meantime, your viable land supply in Lindenow has shrunk to 0.
Thanks, Chris. Michael, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to probably start at the top of the paperwork you have in front of you at 5.2.2. We're not asking for a subdivision. Rezoning and subdivision, it's saying here. We're only asking for a rezoning. I already have 3 lots and 3 zonings. What we're asking for now is 2 lots and 2 zonings. So quite simply, I just want the escarpment, the top of the escarpment, to be zoned residential. The rest of my property will go back to farming. We've agreed with Elaine, you'll have a map with your notes there that'll have a bit of a green patch on it. That, well, it's not green on yours, it's the pink, and then there's another bit. That was an anomaly, I believe, as it was quite clearly stated here. Once upon a time, the land was zoned from the river up to Lindenow-Dargo Road as farming. I'd suggest somewhere about 1999, when Matthew Guy changed a few rules on planning, that all of a sudden the escarpment became a different zoning to what it was. It was and when we were looking at it, that left a part of the escarpment, steep, I can assure you, not quite 90 degrees, but not far short, a strip of land just in under the hill that was going to be a different zoning. We agreed with Elaine, and I said that we would amalgamate that all with the one of the other 2 titles I've got down on the flat, and have a zoning for the down on the flat and one for up on the hill, which I'd like to see as residential. In all the times I've sat around a table similar to this, I've never seen a monetary point put up as rezoning. As Chris just said, I think, congratulations, Kate, it's a good way to start to try to get it done. I think that you as councillors that came on board just recently that want to see change, there's a flaw in the planning. The strategic planners, without being too cruel, possibly haven't been doing their job particularly well. Why is it now?
Well, I don't think that's
Why is it now that this one application triggers a whole rezoning of a town? There's been other rezonings happen in the town that haven't triggered it. And why haven't the strategic planners, while I was on the council, I was asking for them to look at Lindenow. Why is it now that they want to look at the whole of Lindenow when I put up an area that I don't believe can do anything else but be...
Well, Michael, why wasn't it looked at when you were on council, you're on council then?
I did put it up and it was just pushed to one side. No. So I've been trying to get Lindenow moving. I believe Lindenow will go ahead. I believe there's a need there now for more land for residential. Council's approved a boarding house already. Talking with the owners of ZCG, they've said that people there would like to live in Lindenow. And they are looking for blocks that have views. They're not looking to build out on the Red Gum Plain further back where it's wet and soggy. So that's why I put this up. And I asked, why hasn't it happened before? And as councillors, you should be now looking at making sure there's money in the budget for town planning, lakes, Malakuta, Marlow. We shouldn't be catching up. We should be, Orbos, we shouldn't be on a catch up. We should be leading the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Question, councillor Pearls. Directed at Ms Nelson.
Yeah, Miss Nelson, I'm looking at the attachments, and earlier we were talking about this and we were saying there needs to be a road down to the flats if this is to go ahead, and there seems to be a road or a belly goat track that goes down on attachment number page 3 of the attachments. And wondering whether... Oh, sorry.
My comment wasn't so much about a physical road, but a road frontage. So a legal frontage to a road. That track is just a track on the property. It's not a road. Every lot that is created has to have legal road frontage.
So can I go back to that point? Does the far...
Microphone, councillor Pearls.
Oh, does the far right-hand south part of that property, does that actually abut the Dargo Road, the road into Lindenow?
So yes, and that's why if the proposal went ahead, and there is a subdivision here. It's a technical thing. The subdivision is not a question in this case. But if the rezoning went ahead and the lot was created on the escarpment, then to provide access to both lots that extend down onto the flat, the proposal's been put that they should be consolidated so that they have frontage to a road. Otherwise, the lot to the west would not have direct access to a road. At the moment, its frontage is through the parcel of land that we're talking about being township, fronting main road. So if we to create this township zone on the township zone lot on the escarpment, then it prevents one of those lots on the flats getting frontage to a road, unless it's consolidated.
So access to the road, the lot that you were just talking about would be from the what do you call it, the diverging road?
It would just provide it with legal access, legal and practical access off main road.
Councillor Roberts, you had a question?
I think it was covered, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Councillor White?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I actually had two questions for Michael, but he's left the chair, so is he...
Oh, he's there?
Is he... Yeah. Is he okay to still answer from the gallery?
I'll get Michael to come back up.
The first question, Michael, was just to actually clarify this access, because in knowing the your property there. I believe your river flat has access to the Dargo Road without being part of the escarpment. And the other question is, in speaking with planners, they advise that if you go alone on this, that it would be quite a costly exercise for yourself and it may not succeed. But my question to you is, you're prepared to take that risk, are you?
Thank you. I think you've missed my point. I have 2 lots now. I intend to amalgamate, remain with 2, having 1 lot on the escarpment and the rest being the second lot. So I will be amalgamating, basically you could say my flat country is to 1 title. It has access to the Dargo, or Benside Dargo Road. What was your second question? Well, unless I get objections, I believe there shouldn't be a lot more. I've spent a bit now. There shouldn't be a lot more to happen. It's got to go through the next sort of process. If I get objections, I believe that it could go to a panel.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Perhaps I could help and clarify. Mr Freshwater, it's been put to us that there will be some considerable costs associated with this application on behalf of any applicant in this matter. Are you cognizant of that? Are you aware of that fact, that there could be extra costs?
I don't believe there'll be a lot more cost unless there's objections and I've got to go to a panel.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, Councillor Tui would like to ask you a question.
Michael, the access to the river flats, whereabouts is that?
At the foot of the hill on the eastern side, as you go down onto the flat, Councillor Tui. There's a gateway there. Has been for 100 years.
Okay, so I'm looking at just Google Maps, and it shows the property, your property, going down, and then there's Skull Creek covers your property behind your house, and then a property to the right, closer to Bairnsdale. So is that the access that you're talking about to that block?
There is a track there now that is used, a gateway where the trucks and tractors, everyone go in, and it runs along under the foot of the hill and goes across a bridge that we have there. That is the access to the flat. There is Skull Creek there. I have 2 titles. It's 20 chain wide, that block altogether. Yep. There are 2 titles there.
Okay, so the suggestion, so what you're saying is the access actually goes through what would be, if this gets approved, this rezoning, there would be, the access would go through the area that would be rezoned to township zone, is that right?
No. No, the top of the escarpment will be residential zone.
Yep.
And the rest of the property will be farming zone.
It's the TZ in the pink, I think. Is that the TZ in the pink?
Yes. Yes. I'm still struggling to see where the access, Michael, is to that farm zone. Yeah.
At the foot of the hill at Lindenow, you go in immediately. There's a gate there.
Okay. So that.
Can I perhaps?
So where that entry is part of that same title of land behind you.
It will be.
There.
It will be.
It's that bit there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got it here. So what he's saying is that.
Any further questions?
Not there. Yeah, that bit will access this bit. Yeah.
Kate, I have a question in relation to, Chris made a comment about the horticultural or the farming business next door. My concerns in being involved with site-specific rezonings, that pressure can come on from residential areas onto businesses and operating. So there could potentially be some issues there. Have you got a feel for that?
I know, I'm happy to provide a response to a range of things and introduce the item if you would like me to, but looking at the zoning map, there are substantial areas of farming zoned land abutting this property. Most of the western boundary is township, is farming zone, as is all the land to the north and further to the west. The farming zone gives the landowner the right to farm that land, and the residential amenity of those properties is different to being in a township or residential zone. So yes, this is part of the reason why we have zones, is to create that distinction between the different land uses so that you can manage the impact between the two. There's I think a misunderstanding of what's intended by the strategic framework that we're talking about here. It doesn't mean we're going to rezone the whole of Lindenau, but it will give some indication of how land should be rezoned over time in Lindenau. It gives everybody some better understanding of what they can expect to happen around them over time, whereas right now there's little bits of township zone dotted along the main road, significant areas of farming zone which is used for farming. And what we're saying is we need to have a conversation with the community and the landowners to actually understand what the future should look like and over what time that might be achieved. But I'm happy to introduce the item so that council can then debate it if you would like me to do that. I am happy to answer other questions.
I think Michael mentioned how vibrant Lindenau is, and certainly in the last or past 6 years there's been a consolidation of certain properties where we now have 6 of the top national salad producers out of that Lindenau Valley, and the other 2 top 10 out of Wellington. So, the 2 municipalities are providing 8 of the top 10 salad producers. So it is a significant thing that we need to consider, that important horticultural area. That's my only concern. I don't disagree with how we need to tidy up the zones, but my concern is around the industry that's out there now. Any further questions, councillors?
If there's none, Mr Mayor, okay for...
Yeah.
I thought I heard you say you'd concluded. I'm sorry. I do apologise.
We're going to have the introduction of the item now, and if there's any further questions. So we had 2 people that wished to speak to the item. They've done that now, and protocol is that we get the item introduced.
Very much aware of it. I'm just misheard Kate, and I would not take any opportunity for her to speak away.
Thank you. I think it is quite important that the officer's perspective be put on this item, given we've heard the submissions that we have. And while to the applicant this may appear to be a straightforward request, it's the view of officers that that's not the case. And the distinction really is that we are saying it's not just this question is about more than this parcel of land, where the applicant is seeing it as just purely about his parcel of land. He's wanting to view it as an anomaly, as not being township, and I disagree quite strongly about that in terms of the current zoning layout. And council, in considering this matter, is wearing the hat of the planning authority. So it means we have a responsibility to provide sound strategy about the way that we plan for the future of towns and the way that we implement that through the planning scheme to provide landowners with a good understanding about how the town they live in will be used and land will be developed, and what current and future rights landowners might have to actually be developers as well. So the role as the planning authority is really important, because we need to actually be forecasting and understanding what economic, social and environmental issues are being experienced by the community and how those needs are changing, and the reference that the Mayor's made to what's happening in Lindenow and the importance of the agricultural industry, the way some of those land use practices are changing. They're examples of reasons why we have a responsibility to actually understand how are we providing for both agricultural and township development in this part of the Shire. So understanding that broader level of need to plan means that good practice is that we would develop a broad strategy for the town. Now, there's been some preliminary work done which provides some level of guidance, but that hasn't been discussed in detail with the community and it hasn't been adopted by council, and some of the work through the peer review that we undertook revealed some anomalies in that work at the time. So that needs to be revisited. It doesn't mean that we will rezone the whole town and that farmers will be paying rates on residential zone property. That would be something that we would attempt to avoid. We would give people some level of certainty about, we would talk with landowners and the community about how that land use might change over time and what level of demand is needed to be filled over time. I think it's a misguided view that the cost imposed to council to actually do strategic planning is wasted money. That's not the case at all. What it does is actually enable council to make sure that the way that we develop land can most effectively provide for residential environments and other environments that residents want. It means that we can actually do that in a planned way rather than responding to ad hoc need to upgrade infrastructure or change the way that we think about land and how it might be developed, to make sure that it doesn't happen in an ad hoc way where there's not connected roads and open space and the other things that actually need to support growing communities. And if Lindenow is going to be one of those, then there needs to be some thought put into that. So what we're suggesting here is that that step needs to happen before we actually play or do any work with the planning rules and the zoning of land in Lindenow. So we're suggesting that we need to understand that broader context so that there is that ability to understand what does it mean to rezone this particular parcel of land when it comes to further development in Lindenow. And I guess what we're saying is whether you do it now or later, we're going to have to do this piece of work. And if we were to proceed with a site-specific zoning at this location, in the absence of that, then it will be very difficult to undertake, to prevent other future ad hoc rezonings happening in that town. The lack of strategy will make it very difficult to pull that back because we will be setting a precedent with that. I think there are some risks, other risks to council for doing a site-specific amendment is if it is pursued in the absence of appropriately resolved strategic planning framework. And one of those is a real risk that there's a lack of community understanding and confidence in respect to council's future intentions for the development of Lindenow and support of that agricultural industry, and a lack of ability to properly plan for the most effective development outcome overall for Lindenow. It's the use of the township zone in Lindenow may or may not be the right zone. The township zone is a very flexible residential zone that allows all sorts of other uses to happen. It allows subdivision down to quite low residential densities, and I think there needs to be a discussion with that community and the landowners about the development outcomes that we would like to see happen in Lindenow to meet the demand that is likely to be sought there. And importantly, there are risks to the proponent if that work has not been done. Any good planning process to amend the planning scheme because of the rigour of the process that we put applicants through will ask for this strategic justification. This is not an anomaly. This is a request to rezone the land, and it's a request to rezone land that will generate questions about what really is council looking to achieve in Lindenow, and I suspect that any landowner who has concerns about it, the minister and any planning panel would ask the very same questions that I'm suggesting need to be answered before we can undertake this work. This is not a budget gouge. This is being transparent with council about the cost that will be incurred if we are to proceed with this work as a matter of urgency. All I'm doing is being transparent about the cost, and also for the proponent, the likely process. That's why it's included in the recommendation. Yes, it is unusual, but it's about being transparent about that process. There are things in the report that the applicant agrees and disagrees with. It's a balanced report. We've tried to present the case as it appears, and yes, officers were, initially thinking that maybe there was, you could form the view that you could do this as a site-specific amendment. But on balance, and looking at all of the issues and the strategic justification that's required and the potential implications for Lindenow, then my clear recommendation, and I've made this very clear to the applicants and their representatives, that I don't believe this is the right way to achieve the outcome that is being sought. That's maybe enough, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Councillor O'Connell, you had a question?
Oh, thanks. You in part just answered it, Ms. Nelson, but it was more in relation to this information being conveyed to the proponent at the beginning of the application, and why did it take so long to form that view and then only come to it 6 weeks ago? Instead, that conversation would have been better had at the start.
Yeah, look, that may well be the case. Planning is not an exact science. It's a on balance. What's the most appropriate approach? What's the most strategic approach? Planners will often form different views about how things should proceed, because with most planning issues, everyone can have a view. It's not the same as Mr. Waits deals with bridges. Bridges either are going to stand up or they're not. Planning questions are much more complicated than that, and there's always a process at the beginning of these requests to actually work through and understand what the best approach might actually be. Officers can't give the green light. Officers don't make the decision about planning scheme amendments, only the council does. There is no delegated authority to give the green light to anything, and so until it ends up here at the council chamber and until council makes a decision, there's no green light.
But essentially they were given the sort of the view that things would progress fairly smoothly up until about 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm not denying that view may have been put, but as soon as it became clear to me that it wasn't the most appropriate approach to take, that it puts both council and the applicant at risk, then I took action to make that clear to everybody involved. And the report that's been prepared, I think, demonstrates that there's merit in sticking to good planning process in this case for the benefit of council and the proponent ultimately, if we're going to be successful at achieving a better understanding of what this land should be rezoned to. Is it township? Is it something else? What's the density? How does the road network connect? What happens to the adjoining owners? What about open space? What about developer contributions? There are a whole range of questions that will be avoided if this parcel of land is rezoned, and which it will be difficult potentially to regain if on other properties if we don't take this strategic step at this point in time.
Councillor Tui, you had a question?
Kate, in your information that you've supplied us in regards to showing some context, a couple of pages in, it refers to the 2012 planning scheme amendment, which happened to be my property, and further in that paragraph, It says the panel noted that while the recommendation was to approve the rezoning on the basis of the small size of site, relatively minor impacts, and policy that is not as clear as it could be. That is one of my questions. Has that policy changed, or is it still ambiguous as it was? And it does refer to the last part of the sentence in regards to further rezoning of the township, that the decision made back then should not be seen as a precedent for significant further rezoning of the township zone, or to township zone, that each request would need to be reviewed on its merits. So I gather this is the process of reviewing it on its merits. And my question in regards to that policy that was not as clear as it could have been back then, has that been changed? And if so, how has that been changed?
My reading of the independent panel's report was that the way that council presented this, your rezoning, was on the basis that there would be significant impact to surrounding agricultural land uses, and we had objections at that time. The panel formed the view that on the basis of the scale of the amendment involved, that significant impact couldn't be demonstrated, and that as a one-off amendment, they were prepared to support that despite council not supporting it at the time. So no, that policy hasn't substantially changed. That's the issue that the Mayor was talking about the interaction between farming and residential uses. And we have in Lindenow a situation where there are house lots dotted in farming zones, so that lack of clarity exists. There's nothing in the planning scheme that says that we should specifically rezone land or change that zone. It's just the historical pattern at the moment. What the panel did say was that, in effect, it should not be seen as a precedent for further rezoning to the town. And what I'm saying is that this parcel represents the start of, sets a precedent for what will be significant pressure to understand how the balance of this area should be rezoned. So what I'm saying is, don't set a further precedent with a site-specific amendment. Do the planning work to understand how the land should be rezoned. Am I making that? Am I answering the question?
Yeah. If I could maybe just perhaps make a comment in regards to the amount of land that abuts farming land. To be honest, my block of land there abuts more farming land than this proposal here. Now, so in regards to that, if for argument's sake any of the houses that have farmland abutting them, behind them or next to them, what would be the case if one of those the owners of one of those properties complained to council in regards to farming activity? How would that work?
Well, if a township zone owner complained to council about farming activity happening on the farm zone, there's probably very little that we would do about that. But in a practical sense on the ground, there would be pressure exerted by one or other landowners about the actual activities there. So it can become quite a significant neighbourhood dispute that council may or may not be able to intervene in, depending on what the complaint is. You'll see that there are, I'm not sure if you're looking at the lot layout there, but there's quite a number of small lots. There are some small lots in the farming zone, and already what you can see is a pattern of subdivision that's quite ad hoc and quite opportunistic, getting access directly from the main road. So there's pretty much nothing that really needs to be done to service those lots. And what we're saying really is, if we let each of these lots develop on a site-by-site basis, setting a precedent with a site-specific zoning of 1.5 hectares of land here, then what you will get is more of that ad hoc subdivision and rezoning happening here, and I don't think that's a good use of serviced land or land that is appropriate for farming depending on how the strategic assessment works out, don't think that's a good way to see the town develop. What you'll get is court bowl style subdivisions in each of those parcels, and there won't be the ability to provide connectivity between that part of town unless you come out onto Main Road and go back in. And I'm using that as a basic example, but it doesn't allow, if we just say, look, this is an anomaly and let's just rezone this township, and then the next one along is no different. It's got, township zoning all along the front of it. Is that an anomaly? And we'll just let that happen as well. I'm saying just take a step back and have a look at how we should actually allow this area to develop in a way that generates lots that are the type of lots that people in Lindenow are looking for. We need to understand that and how we create the right residential amenity, because it is a slightly unusual and potentially sensitive area, overlooking the escarpment, some parts at least. How do you create the right environment? The way you do that is to have a look at it with the landowners and the community, and then you look at what the planning scheme should do to support that.
Councillor White, you had a question?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Kate, the rest of the street, all the way down to the old garage, is either residential blocks which already exist, or it is being utilised for vegetable growing. So if you said that it was going to be ad hoc, they already exist, and obviously Bulmers, who are the vegetable growers in that area, have no intention of wanting to push for subdivision along there. So, in other words, the only piece left is Michael's. The rest of it would remain as it is until such time as Bulmers thought that perhaps that 8 or 10 hectares that they have on top of the escarpment would be nice in building blocks.
Well, that's something that we would need to explore with the landowners and with the community, and understand what the future land use, the most appropriate future land use is in Lindenow. I think we can't make assumptions about that. That's something that we need to understand. And yes, the zoning pattern at the moment reflects the actual land use. It doesn't reflect what a future land use pattern might look like. I don't know what the Bulmers' view would be of gradually more township zoning being provided in this part of town. That's not something that's been discussed.
Is there any further questions? Councillor Pearls.
Mate, on your amended copy that you've given to us, at dot point 5 it says, before any works commence on site, a sealed rural crossover design must be submitted to and approved by the responsible authority. It's on the last page. It's on the back page. What does that mean?
Look, that's an example of a detail on a permit that I was talking about before. But I mentioned before that, or I think I mentioned, I can't remember when I said this, but in this case the request is for a joint planning scheme amendment and planning permit process. So as a normal part of the documentation, we would prepare a draft planning permit, which would be exhibited with the amendment documentation so that people can see if the subdivision proceeds, this is what the conditions are. Don't obsess with the subdivision. The subdivision is not the significant thing here. Where the access is, what the lots are laid out like, is a minor consideration. The significant consideration here is rezoning all of that land to township, because that will be subject to further development. The way that the parcels of land are laid out in the titles, I don't mind how that happens. It's the rezoning to township that's the challenge.
Further questions? Thank you, Ms Nelson. Sorry? No, he's got no further questions.
No further questions, so therefore, Mr Mayor, I'd like, as I earlier foreshadowed, I'd like to move a motion before council. Do I have your approval? Thank you, sir. What I'd like to do is move the council support the request to rezone the land and approve a two-lot subdivision planning permit. And by doing such, I'd like to move the following motion. That council, having considered all planning matters, approves the draft documentation provided at Appendix 1 and authorises officers to 1. Seek authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare a planning scheme amendment, proposed amendment C143, combined with a planning permit application to the East Gippsland planning scheme to rezone land at 28 Main Street, Lindenow, being Lot 2 on the Lodge Plan 144188 and Lot 2 on Lodge Plan 221179 M for Mary, both in the parish of Coongoolmarang from farming zone, Schedule 1 to township zone and farming zone, Schedule 4, and consider a planning permit to subdivide the land into two lots. 2. Subject to authorisation from the Minister for Planning, prepare and exhibit a combined planning permit and amendment, proposed amendment C143, to the East Gippsland planning scheme. 2. Rezone the land at 28 Main Street, Lindenow, being Lot 2 on Lodge Plan 144188 and Lot 2 on Lodge Plan 221179 M for Mary, both in the parish of Coongoolmarang from the farming zone, Schedule 1 to township zone and farming zone, Schedule 4, and subdivide the land at 28 Main Street, Lindenow, being Lot 2 on the Lodge Plan 144188 and Lot 2 on Lodge Plan 221179 M for Mary, both in the parish of Coongoolmarang. That's my motion, sir.
So moved by Councillor Ellis. Do we have a second? Councillor Pels. Speakers. Councillor Ellis.
This has been quite a lengthy consideration, Mr Mayor, and many considerations and issues have been put before council this evening. I'd particularly like to thank Ms Nelson for the considered report that she provided council to work through. I'd also like to thank her for her application to the matter before us. The matter before us this evening deserves support, members of the council, and I feel that it is an appropriate end to that zone in Lindenow. I can well recall actually Councillor Tui's application some years ago with a similar lengthy debate took place. I consider that the application is reasonable and therefore I recommend the motion to council for adoption. Thank you.
And the second would like to speak.
Mr Mayor, can I just raise a point of order, please?
Certainly. What is that point of order, Councillor?
The point is that there was an original recommendation that was put that we haven't had a chance to discuss, and I'm wondering what order of those recommendations can be put.
There's a motion on the
It hasn't, if I can respond to that, Mr Mayor, this was the original motion. The other motion was not put to council. I foreshadowed moving the particular motion, and that I say is the tabled motion.
Yeah, I accepted that motion.
Yeah, sorry, and I just didn't feel I had an opportunity to put this motion as well.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. I think it's time for me to talk and you get to talk in a minute.
Your point of order is noted. Noted, Councillor Eaves. Councillor Pels.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regards to this application, I feel the applicant has been unjustly ambushed by council's issue about the zoning of the township of Lindenow. This appears to me to be a sensible progressive upgrade to the Lindenow township, and like our previous applicant, Councillor Toohey, whose motion was moved in 2012, then it was actually granted in 2014. The scheme dates back to 1999 and it seems to be ageing, and I'd say it's probably something that council needs to address on its merit, that we do actually need to schedule the Lindenow structure plan into our costing to be addressed more sooner than later. The bottom line here is, with regards to the abutting blocks that actually abut this property, they are actually zoned in the township zone, which is appropriate for this applicant to be able to proceed. The bottom line, that the farming section is being addressed, is also taken into consideration, and I feel that this applicant is being delayed in their process because of internal council difficulties with regards to entertaining his request. So with that,
would you like to clarify? What do you mean by that, Councillor?
Well, I actually believe that when we actually went ahead with the Lindenow Township planning back in 2012, that this had been addressed then. And apparently it hasn't been signed, sealed and delivered, and there's an issue with the township. We feel that I feel basically we've probably let the community down in that sense, and it should have been addressed prior to this time. I feel that in order to address that, we need to step up and be leaders and get our town planning department up to scratch with regards to what our community is going to be wanting into the future. And I feel it's a responsible decision and mindful of the Lindenow horticultural industry, and which is a sophisticated and complex component of our community. I think it actually addresses the issue with regards to the farmland there. The bottom line is the section that ex-councillor Freshwater wants to develop is actually rocky. It's on an escarpment. Basically, the bottom line is it is land that won't be used for farming, and it's an appropriate development for it. And that's the end of my point.
Thanks, Councillor Bell. Speakers against?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm a bit disappointed. I've thought that some of those comments then were unnecessary pot shots at our planning officers, and I hope that they are not taken in the context of maybe a simplistic language. I think our council officers work quite hard.
They do.
I think we need to stop and draw breath, councillors, and I urge you to do so. Planning is a complex, and it's also an iterative process, which is a big word. Iterative means that it's a to and fro, that a proponent will come, they'll start a process, have a discussion, and the good thing about an iterative process is as the proponent's planning intentions emerge, it may become apparent that what is proposed or is emerging to proposed may not sit in comfortably with what the planning process and the planners think is appropriate. And I think it's good. I think it's good that there are checks and balances and gateways that proponents progress through, especially in significant developments like this, or changes, ad hoc changes like this, where somebody can say, hang on a second, this is sitting outside our remit and we need to take this to council. I think that's important. So I commend the council officers for the work they've done and for bringing it to us, and everybody in the Shire should be grateful for that. Some people might think that that is actually slowing down the planning process, but planning process is the key here. That's the thing. I'm not sure that there's a diminished supply of land in Lindenow. What I am sure of is that Lindenow is a vibrant and emerging and developing township with a variety of competing uses: farming, transport, a cafe culture, a manufacturing culture, a residential culture, a school culture. All of these things are there competing. When you have those multiple uses and you start to allow ad hoc development, you will run into problems, councillors. And we councillors have been for years dealing with legacy developments that have happened, and it takes years to retrieve them. It takes years. And I urge you to stop and look at the original recommendation. The original recommendation doesn't say it's not going to happen. It says, let's stop and put a plan around this so that when it does happen, it takes into consideration all those vibrant new uses that are emerging for a town like Lindenow. And hopefully it will happen in Orbost. And it is happening in Lakes Entrance, it's happening in Paynesville, and we put planning around them. My view is that if we put some proper planning around this, it will probably take about the same time as the proponent is going to have by taking this to a minister and a planning panel. It won't be any slower. But what it will do is it will create certainty for him and other potential developers, and probably increase the value of his land, because it won't be ad hoc and it won't be subject to ad hoc objections in future. It will put certainty around it. It's so important. I urge you to exercise caution, and we need to consult the community in regard to any matters regarding zoning. And that, I believe, hasn't been done. And if there's a changed view of the use and strategic intentions of Lindenow, we haven't tested that yet, and we haven't heard that. And to have a one-off application in an ad hoc manner doesn't take into account the other side of planning, which is the community benefit. And I think we need to stop and consider that, councillors. Supporting ad hoc planning without consideration of a planned future will just create anomalies. And we will be dealing with them, and I believe you will be dealing with them here. Councillors, you've had a lot of colourful presentations, emotive presentations, and also some sidetracks. The basic matter here is planning and organised planning. If you really care about Lindenow, if you really care about the proponents' potential to assist Lindenow, stop, don't vote for this recommendation, go back to the original one, which puts structure, order, organisation around it. And yes, we're not providing money for the planning department just ad hoc. We are now seeing that Lindenow is emerging for those variety of uses that I've just described. And we can invest some time in it and invest some money in it and getting it right. Let's do it once, let's do it right. Otherwise, it'll be back here in a couple of years' time. There'll be another long debate, there'll be another individual proponent, and it sets a dangerous precedent. It really does. Councillors, vote against that, and I recommend the original motion that is on the table.
Speaker for the motion. Any further speakers against the motion? If there's no further speakers, I will put the motion. All those in favour of the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Ellis, you're quite right. Right of reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My words will be fairly quick, and first of all I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Reid's eloquent argument against what I consider to be a non-ad hoc application to council. It's a logical consequence of many decades of planning leading to the creation of the township of Lindenow. The points that he made in relation to appropriate strategic planning is valid, and it is an action that I would be encouraging councillors to support, both Councillor Reid and I, in approaching the officers to commence the concept of a strategic plan. We need to be considered about what takes priority over the other areas within our shire, but it is certainly something that this, as a catalyst, in fact, this is what this application is, it's a catalyst for consideration to council, perhaps a wake-up call for us to say, we haven't addressed a growing area, we need to do something about it, and this is the spur for us to consider that application, that area of Lindenow and its growing economic benefits to our wider community. The points also made in relation to the appreciation of council officers is endorsed by myself. I do appreciate the hard work, and I do particularly appreciate the considered argument put by
Ms Nelson in relation to this matter and her colleagues. I also appreciate the degree of consideration that the applicant had put to us here this evening. The lengthened debate has simply just provided us with an opportunity to make an appropriate and considered decision, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, to vote in the affirmative for this motion. So I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried.
Yes.
Yes, Councillor Pearls. Not really. No. Do you need a break? If you need a break, we'll... Yep. Yep, if you'd like a 5-minute break, you can have a 5-minute break. No.